All right. Welcome back. It's episode 67 of Take Human Action. I'm Calvin. I'm your host, and James is back with us. How you doing, James?
Hey, Calvin. Good to be back.
Yeah. So for anyone who didn't catch our Thanksgiving episode, this is James Jenneman from Libertarian Party of Minnesota, retired podcaster, and well, he's got his hat in a bunch of different things, and his perspective and his insight is always welcome.
Yeah, thanks. What which channel are we on right now? Is this like the National Mises Caucus or
This is
Pennsylvania, or
the
what are we
Pennsylvania
doing?
Mises Caucus. So it's going to our Twitter, our
Oh,
Facebook, and our YouTube.
nice. Hello,
Yeah,
Pennsylvanian Mecox. Good to see you all. I can't actually
yeah.
see any of you other than Calvin, obviously. I can see him.
Yeah,
Anyway,
well, this promises to be an interesting topic. So I think most of us have probably heard about the new Civil War movie that's been coming out April of next year. So James brought that to my attention. I don't think I'd heard about it before, and I was just like, yeah, that'd be a good topic to discuss. That's something that libertarians talk about anyway, and it sounds like that topic might be talked about outside of libertarian circles too. So
yeah.
unless you had anything you wanted to say at the beginning, I figure we can just start by watching the trailer for the movie and then just use that as a jumping off point to go into our thoughts and then libertarian perspectives on a possible sectional divide. Anything you want to say?
Or sectional divides, sections will divide. Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah, all of the above.
because it looks like there's
Let's
multiple
get into it.
divides according to what we've been seeing. So,
Yeah,
you ready to go?
yeah, let's do it.
All right.
States have seceded.
The United States Army ramps up activity.
The White House issued warnings to the Western forces as well as the Florida Alliance.
The three-term president assures the uprising will be dealt with swiftly.
Let me know if you want to try anything on.
Are you guys aware there's like a pretty huge civil war going on all across America?
We just try to stay out. With what we see on the news, seems like it's for the best.
I love how like flirty she sounded. She's just like
Citizens of America,
the
so-called
like,
Western
and
forces
stuff.
of Texas and California
Very good.
have suffered a very great defeat at the hands.
So I guess I'm going to pause it, and we can see the map here, kind of in reverse on the screen. I don't want to have to watch this whole 2.5 minute thing without pausing and commenting, because 2.5 minutes is kind of a long time to watch like one piece of media. But so the first thing that you notice is that he's talking about California and Texas, and you can kind of see in the map here. And Calvin, I think you pulled up an image of like this thing recreated on Reddit.
Yeah,
But you can kind of see
over. I can switch over to that.
Oh, sure, yeah. If you want to, we can do that.
Yeah, and then we can come back to this. So
Nice.
this is the map that somebody on the internet recreated just from that backwards image on the mirror. So good for them, because this was making waves all over the internet. And of course, the question was, in what universe would California and Texas ever work together on anything, especially if they were not under the same government? So that is an interesting question.
And Tim Pool commented on that a lot too, but it doesn't sound like, it doesn't necessarily sound like California and Texas are like in cahoots, other than maybe they're allied against the loyalist states. Because, California has a Cal-Exit movement and Texas has a Texit movement. And that's, I think, probably why they have, focused on them as the seceded countries. Plus, they're the only ones that really could, exist as their own nation state, so to speak. I know New Hampshire is kind of building a budding secessionist movement, but I don't think that New Hampshire could be self-sustaining in the same way that California and Texas could be.
So there are actually, historically, there are four current states that were their own countries at one point with virtually identical borders in all cases. So Texas is obviously one of them. The other three might surprise you. They're Vermont, Hawaii, and California. And that's if you exclude the 13 colonies that became the United States, because,
Sure.
Depending on how you look at it, they could be considered their own countries as well. But even excluding those 13, the other 4 were independent for varying lengths of time. Like the other than California, the other 3 were independent for years. Like Vermont was fighting the British, but they had no representation in Continental Congress. They were just kind of doing their own thing for the most part. But they didn't join the U.S. I don't think until the 1790s, maybe. So there's definitely a lot more history to that than people think.
So Vermont joined the Union after the Revolutionary War, which we might get into, but before the Constitution was ratified. Is that right?
I think the Constitution was ratified before they joined. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, I knew that Vermont had another one kind of in the there's a secessionist scholar who Brian McClanahan cites a lot from Vermont. It's the Second Vermont Republic, I think is what they call it. Yeah, so sure, duly noted. That's another state that may have seceded. Of course, for movie purposes, I don't think you're going to necessarily want to get as granular as all that. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's more for setting the
they would
scene
only
that
pick
it
on
wasn't always
Florida.
like these states were just, I don't know, owned by some other European country or something, because that's not the case for a lot of them.
Yeah. Right. Thomas Naylor is that Vermont scholar who I mentioned earlier. Do we want to get back into the trailer and keep going?
Yeah. So we can get back into it. We'll come back to some of the alliances a little bit later on. So
United States military.
Mr. President, do you regret the use of airstrikes against American citizens?
We're moving to D.C. today.
You need to go down there.
They shoot journalists on sight in the Capitol. Every instinct in me says.
I feel like the music is turned off at this point, so it's just the dialogue. Unless, can you hear the background music, or is it just me?
I can hear everything.
Oh, okay, I'm only hearing the people talking. It sounds so weird without any sort of exciting music to go. All right, I'll keep playing.
This is death. Blooded.
Every time I survived a war zone, I thought I was sending a warning home. Don't do this. But here we are.
There's some kind of misunderstanding here. What? Well, you're American, okay?
Okay. What kind of American are you? You don't know?
The Western forces will reach the White House on July 4th.
Oh my God.
Get in the car! Get in the car!
Move, move, move!
You're gonna hang back.
I'm not hanging back.
One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Go, 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 go!
God bless America.
All right, so that's that. I think it's probably rated R.
Probably.
So what do you think, Calvin? Why don't you get us started?
Well, it's just kind of funny that I don't know what else to call them. The loyalists. I think that's what they labeled it as on the map. I'll just bring that back up for a minute. So that's what's left of the states that did not secede. So they were saying they shoot journalists on site in DC. So that basically means that, all the democracy dies in darkness stuff, that's just out the window now. Any journalists that they don't like shooting on site. I mean, I don't know if that's what they were going for, but there's definitely been a lot of prosecution and even persecution of journalists that they don't like. This, just look at, they're charging people who are reporting on January 6th now. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on names, but That's just insane. Like I
Yeah,
don't even know what to say about that.
the dude from Infowars, Owen Schroyer,
Right.
you know, he was on I don't remember one of the shows, you know, one of the probably Timcast or something like that, but talking about how, you know, they were there, like they had a permit, even like they even went through the city to get a permit to protest, which is kind of above and beyond, if you ask me. And there's no like evidence that he did anything to vandalize or be violent or anything like that. And they still prosecuted him, and I think they even gave him jail time, which is just nuts. You know,
Right. So
I mean,
I think
he's. It's not just that. You know, like nobody who was there on January 6th should have been prosecuted if they weren't doing anything violent or vandalous or whatever. I don't know if vandalous is a word. But
vandalizing.
the fact that the fact that this guy is a journalist, a credentialed journalist with a permit to be there as a protester, you know, it's just beyond the pale. It's just nuts.
Right. And so I don't know if the director if that's what he was leaning into, but there's definitely a precedent there. Snowden, this has been going on with him for years. So yeah, it's starting to become more and more possible to see a world where that kind of thing does happen, and it's sad. It's sad to see.
Yeah. My gripe with this is different, I think, maybe from other people's gripes. I don't see any sort of like this is the good guys state and this is the bad guys state, or you know, North versus South, or you know, split down the middle like this is. It doesn't feel necessarily geographic to me, which is, hey JC, which is a little bit that's a little bit different, I think. The A24 conception, it makes it a little bit too neat and tidy, and I just don't see anything like that really happening, if that makes sense.
So you're thinking kind of along the lines of what Bill Maher said, that if there was like another civil war, then the battle lines would be drawn in Nana's kitchen.
I mean, yeah, I didn't hear Bill Maher say that, but yes, that makes sense. Now, I guess it also matters kind of how this all shakes out. So I am operating under the assumption that the United States empire, which I think a lot of times when libertarians talk about the U.S. empire, they're talking about like NATO and they're talking about the Middle East and things like that. We have to remember that the U.S. started as like just 13 little colonies. It's not, this westward expansion was not part of like the original. It wasn't how it was sold to the people. I think in hindsight, we know that Jefferson, like the Jeffersonians and the Hamiltonians, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, both kind of had that in mind. That's why Jefferson talks about the so-called Empire of Liberty and things like that. So westward expansion was always on the table. But what we're looking at is the American empire. It's not just the Middle East. It's not just the overseas stuff. It's not just Alaska and Hawaii. It's the Louisiana Purchase and everything that came after that. And when you think about it like that, it becomes a little bit easier to see how this thing might all hash out. To me, the Constitution is the days of the Constitution are limited. They're numbered. Nobody knows what the number is. It might be tomorrow. It might be the 2024 election that does it in. It might have another few decades. But eventually, this map that we see without all the gray and blue sections, it's going to look very different from how it looks now. My best estimation is that the sort of the Northeast corridor might be the Loyalist states. But even then, you've got like New Hampshire that probably won't want to stay. But then again, when things shake out geographically, new cultures tend to emerge. You know what I mean? Like what we think of as American culture is really just the lowest common denominator of, you know, the collective cultures of the many nations that make up the American continent. And so when the state takes on the role of culture craft rather than just letting the societies build their culture as they see fit, and let them emerge organically and naturally, that's kind of what the meaning of the word nation kind of originally was. It's something that occurs naturally. It's the culture that emerges from a people living in a place. It's not the legislation that the republic, places on the people. And that's why I'm so down on calling, the United States a nation. I mentioned it. I probably mentioned it 3 times last time we talked. I don't like the idea of the nation state as sort of the basic political organizing unit, as the political parties here in Minnesota call them. The basic political organizing unit is a city or a village or a town or even a neighborhood. It's not the nation state. It's not this big map. And that, to me, is the biggest fatal flaw of liberalism. We have had the misfortune of being born at the end of the liberal age, and so this is why, like, Calvin, I'm going to talk shit a little bit, but I'm going to have to. These classical liberal guys trying to sort of infiltrate the Libertarian Party with classical liberalism, is not only is it does it feel tone deaf because we're no longer in a liberal age. That's why they're not gaining any traction. That's why Josh Eagle, when he can't gain any traction on his pro NATO, pro funding Ukraine stances, he has to leave the classical liberal caucus because even they aren't on board with that little bit of liberalism. But that is liberalism. We have to understand that. Liberalism is not opposed to an interventionist empire, because for liberalism to thrive, it has to spread. It's kind of a dead ideology if it doesn't spread itself inorganically. It's kind of contrary to common sense in a lot of ways. Even classical liberalism, even the stuff that libertarianism grew out of, unbeknownst to us, maybe even up to the most recent, like COVID or whatever it was that started red pilling people. It's an incoherent and dead on arrival ideology, and libertarians are going to have to come to grips with that. Otherwise, we're also going to be a dead on arrival ideology. And I'm kind of going far afield of the Civil War movie. But it's kind of where my brain took me. So you feel free to recenter me.
Yeah, I did not expect to be going there tonight, but hey, that makes sense. And when people are thinking in terms of radical shifts, and we've gone so far afield from the values that brought the the states into existence in an independent form from Great Britain. We've just come so far from those, liberty values. It's time to consider what we need to do in order to at least attempt to get back to that. And I think that's what the Libertarian Party, the now Libertarian Party, the Mises Caucus, have been trying to do all along, trying to wake people up to what's been going on.
So, and that having been said, like, I don't necessarily see a huge problem with this map. I think that the loyalist faction is probably going to be much smaller than what the map depicts.
Right.
And, probably like South Carolina would probably be part of what that Florida Alliance map, maybe Louisiana would be its own thing because they're so unique. But when you look at it in terms of culture and of nations, then it makes a little bit more sense. Like the Midwest is kind of one culture. Minnesota, there's not a whole lot of daylight between the culture of Minnesota, which tends to vote blue, and Kansas, which tends to vote red. They're very similar culturally. And that's why I think that a national divorce, whatever that looks like, hopefully a peaceful one, hopefully one where things just kind of happen naturally rather than needing a civil war, it could end up with a collection of nations that actually act like nations. There's no reason that Kansas and Minnesota need to be super duper different culturally, even if we are a little bit different politically. So maybe Minnesota values freedom to choose to terminate a pregnancy, whereas Kansas values not terminating pregnancies. I don't necessarily see that as an insurmountable difference, as long as people are making their arguments in good faith and not seeing other people as literally the other. But you can't have that in a collection of 300 million people. It can only be like a few million. And the stronger and stronger the legislation gets, and I'm consciously using the word legislation rather than law. The stronger and stronger the legislation and bureaucratic regulation and things like that get, the less work that the people have to do in order to maintain their culture. That's the big thing to me. The continuation, like the building and fostering of culture, is the role of societies. And when we outsource that role, when we outsource it to legislators and other, authoritative bodies, then we stop doing that work of maintaining the culture, and that's how cultures crumble. Just like any other muscle, when you don't work it out, it atrophies.
Right.
So anyway, right. So this map, it's a good start, but it's probably not how it's going to all shake out, I guess is what I'm driving.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's just each. So I can. Well, you can start if you want. Just tell me, like, if you were, let's say you were making this movie and you were going to divide up the states based on what made the most sense. You can do that, and we can talk about that for a minute, and then I can do the same thing. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Sure. Well, there's a reason libertarians don't make movies, and when we do, the movies are terrible. It's because we're not thinking creatively. We're thinking analytically, and analysis doesn't really translate to art.
Whatever would make the most sense logically. Then you don't have to think about it from like making
sure
a movie.
Well, so to me, like New England, like we talked about last time, New England is its own kind of thing, and the Deep South is kind of its own thing. I would say like Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, northern Florida, maybe Louisiana, parts of Texas, maybe. Oklahoma is kind of its own thing, but it probably folds into the South. Texas is definitely its own thing. Texas is a few things. I grew up there, so I had the benefit of taking Texas history, which is a required class in middle school. And we learned about the different regions of Texas and how it really is. It really is like 4 different unique subcultures. So even that is asking for like a second kind of national divorce. But I guess I would see Texas breaking off on its own. The Midwest is tricky because Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, if you count, like I consider Ohio closer to Pennsylvania culturally than I consider it to Nebraska. The Illinois-Indiana divide, or Illinois really is the dividing line there. Indiana and Ohio are kind of similar to me. And then, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas are kind of similar. And then you get the Western states, and I don't really know what to do with them. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and probably Colorado, maybe Nevada, are kind of a thing. Arizona, New Mexico are kind of a thing, but that's probably an uneducated guess. I don't really know too much about Arizona, New Mexico, and then California is probably its own thing. Hopefully, okay. I went from right to left, but.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. So, okay,
but,
so
and this is the big thing, though. So we heard from who's that congresswoman who was talking about national divorce? Was it Marjorie Taylor Greene or the other one? It doesn't matter. One of the Congress people.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. Was it her?
I think it was her. Okay. So she said that we needed a national divorce between red states and blue states, and that doesn't make any sense because it's like a checkerboard. There's red states and blue states everywhere. And the one thing about the nations that emerge eventually organically, the organic nations, is that they are geographically contiguous. The argument could be made that New York City, and this is in the book American Nations by Colin Woodard. I recommend that to everybody. So New York City is its own thing in that book. There's 9 nations that make up the American continent, and it's really Mexico, so like North America. New York City is its own thing, and then everything else is dispersed throughout because New York City emerged as a trade hub. It's kind of like the like, I don't know, Babylon or Rome or something like that. And other than that, they're all contiguous. And I know we've got the internet to make it so that you could be like a citizen of a virtual nation if you wanted to be, but that's not how nations work. That's not a thing. What we have learned in the last few years is that the promise of the internet is not what it was promised to us in the 90s. We do not as humans have the ability to create non-physical communities where the communities are self-governing, self-sustaining, and like close-knit, high trust, that kind of thing. You can, like the Mises Caucus Facebook group, for instance, is a great, or at least it used to be. I haven't really been in there very much recently, but it used to be just a great place to go and share ideas and build culture and that kind of thing. But it was not a nation. Part of being a nation is that you're in a physical location. So anyway, so that's a really important point, and so that's why the red state blue state thing doesn't make sense. I've also seen a bunch of conservatives say that it would be like urban versus rural, but that doesn't make sense either because you can't like separate it. Those two things need each other. The farmers need the urban dwellers to buy their food, and the urban dwellers need the farmers to feed them. It's a symbiotic relationship. The problem is the bigness. It has to be made smaller. Once it is made smaller, then cultures emerge. And from the culture, then you can start forming governments and legislation and things like that. But you're going to get good government and good legislation because you're culturally united. And it doesn't matter if Alabama wants to do something that California finds reprehensible or vice versa, because they're not united to one another in that way. They're not united politically. They might be united, with a trade relationship or something like that. But we trade with China, and China is despicable. And I know that this is Pollyanna, and it's almost certainly not going to shake out like that. But this is a way that we can do it peacefully, is by letting it happen naturally rather than by force. So now you get to talk now, Calvin. I've been talking for so long. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. But yeah, I just want to clarify that point because that is important, and I wanted to say that at some point as well. So. I am not a fan of violence. I don't think that any, even though some of the situations we're describing, at least in our opinions, may be optimal in terms of decentralization, I don't want I don't think there needs to be any violence. I don't think there should be any violence. And I'm just anti-violence in general when it comes to just about everything short of self-defense. So, even though there might be a civil war here in this film, my guess is that I think this holds true if it were to happen in real life too. If there were to be any violence, it would be the central government trying to reabsorb any seceding states by force. And my guess is that's probably how the Civil War in this movie started as well, although I don't know if we'll find that out or not. So with that said, okay, I'll start from the Northeast and work my way down. So, I think that New Hampshire in the long run would end up being its own thing, and maybe Maine could either take a chunk of New Hampshire to kind of compromise with them to stay contiguous with the rest of the U.S., or they could just join in some sort of union with New Hampshire. Because I feel like if New Hampshire turns into like a prosperous, autonomous free country of sorts, then I don't see any reason why Maine wouldn't want to join them at that point. So maybe Vermont too, although that's a little more questionable. As for the rest of New England and New York and possibly New Jersey as well, I could see them joining together with at least the eastern part of Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and maybe North Carolina to form like a loyalist bloc. And then as for the southern states, which would be just about everything along the Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Tennessee northern borders on south, excluding North Carolina, but including South Carolina, I could see them separately seceding, but not like forming a less centralized compact of sorts, or just doing a defensive alliance, but staying disunited. Western part of Pennsylvania, Kentucky, West Virginia, maybe Ohio and Indiana, and I'll just throw in Michigan. I could see them being another block along the same lines. Then again, with Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, and Wisconsin, everything west of that, except for the coast of the coastal states on the Pacific, I could see being another block. I'm like a bigger Great Plains block. And then I just think that, I mean, between Oregon and Washington and California, the dominating cultures seem so similar that even if they don't necessarily want to join with California in some sort of union, I could see California just being in a position to force it on them. So I could see them being another block. And then Alaska,
yeah, that's
Hawaii,
another one of those.
Well, they might want to stay loyal, but it'll be kind of hard since they're disconnected from everything else. So we'll see.
Yeah. The Oregon thing for sure is another kind of strange one, because like Western or a chunk of Eastern Oregon is currently trying to join Idaho because they're so politically different from the rest of the state. Exactly. And then you've got the state of Jefferson, which is Northern California and part of Southern Oregon, I think.
Yeah, I know
trying
what you're
to form
talking
their own
about.
state.
It's
so that's a couple more secession movements.
Right. It's most of California north of San Francisco, like across the bay there.
Mm.
I believe that's what it would be. So yeah,
but,
definitely.
And that gets back to my point a little bit, that a lot of this is cultural rather than political. And so even if we look at it like as how they vote right now, if we look at that right now, then like none of this really makes sense. Idaho and Utah are as red as it comes, especially Utah. But like I could easily see them joining forces with. Yeah, I could easily see them joining culturally with these other places, and then just having slightly different politics from one another. The same way that today, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are much different from the rest of PA. But you coexist politically because you understand each other. A liberal in Alabama has more in common with a conservative in Alabama than she does with a liberal in California, usually speaking. And a conservative in California, just look at the freaking Speaker of the House who was just deposed, McCarthy. He talks like a California progressive. He's slightly more, more to the right than they are politically, but culturally, he's one of them. And it falls on my ears weird. I don't know if that's the same with everybody else, but to me, the left right divide breaks down when you when you make the politics more local, because people
Yeah.
are looking at the same problems and coming up with different solutions for those problems as they see them. But you have closer to 2020 vision when you're looking at it locally, rather than try to look at it like a big picture, if that makes sense.
Right, because you might have a Democrat in California who wants, I don't know, they want to support pro-choice policy, so they're voting for the Democrats because of that. And you might have someone in New York who's voting for them because, I don't know, they want a higher minimum wage or something. Like, not that those are standard for those two regions to vote for Democrats for those reasons, but it could, with only two big parties like that, you could end up in a situation where they're voting for those parties for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that there's something to be said for Texas and California being the only states
Back
that
to the movie.
would not have a problem being their own countries. I think New Hampshire has some of that too. Most people don't seem to recognize it, who aren't in the know about the Free State Project and everything, but they definitely have some potential there. I don't think Pennsylvania would be the worst either, because they still have the Delaware River to get access out to the sea. They had Lake Erie. They got plenty of places they could go.
Yeah, especially if they were to merge with New Jersey. I mean, then you got everything.
Yeah, then they really would have everything. Yeah, because I think at one point, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware were all one colony.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah, so then at that point, you really would have just about everything you needed. So, yeah.
And then, from there, then you can get into treaties and economic, relationships and things like that. When you've got the nations shaken out a little more naturally, a little bit more organically, a little bit more along cultural lines, rather than the force of the American military. And we should also, maybe this sounds woke or whatever, but we should also recognize that a lot of this land was already occupied by other peoples, and I don't know what the future holds as far as that relationship goes. Like, what does the sort of European American relationship with the Native American, for lack of a better word, what does that relationship look like? If the U.S. government were to dissolve, then you would have lots and lots of regional governments that all would need to reestablish those relationships. My guess is, given that those governments would be forming in the 21st century, or the 22nd century, however long it takes for this to happen. I want to reiterate, like, I have no doubt in my mind, and everyone listening should have no doubt in their minds, that the timeline for the existence of the United States is finite. Like, it's not the indispensable nation or anything like that. Like, it is going to come to an end, because all things do, and all things come to an end, especially when they are created by force, like the United States was. It is not a naturally existing nation in the same way that Florence is a naturally existing nation. Italy is another. All of the European nations, all of the nations that kind of came about after the end of the Middle Ages and into the Enlightenment. All of these nation states are really artificially constructed, so they're kind of all sort of doomed to the same sort of fate. But the United States is unique in that it was the one that was actually created in order to be like the beacon for this new political ideology that was being formed in liberalism. Like, it was conceived of and established for that purpose. It wasn't the purpose of building a culture, of building a people, of building a tribe. It truly was supposed to be like a melt pot. And as much as I love my melting pot, and I truly do, that kind of thing is not sustainable, especially when you throw in the heavy hand of the government. trying to form culture rather than just letting it form itself. And I guess that kind of gets to the idea of the United States as a nation. I was so Dave Smith was on Orrin McIntyre's show this past week, and I was able to get a question in for the two of them. Basically, is the United States is it correct to refer to the United States as a nation? And Orrin McIntyre, who refers to it as a nation all the freaking time, it drives me crazy, and that's why I wanted to bring it up to him. And what better time than with Dave Smith on the show, someone who I thought would give a similar answer to the answer that I would give to the question. But they were kind of in agreement. Orrin, his first response was, "Yeah, whatever happened to these United States?" And Dave kind of built on that, and he was like, I don't think it was originally supposed to be a nation, but it became one, and especially it became one after World War II. I asked Tom Woods and Brian McClanahan the exact same question, and they gave me a better answer, or at least the answer that I would have come up with, which is no. And there's not like it started to act like one or whatever. When it started to act like one was in the tail end of the Progressive era, which is that was when the United States. That's when the downfall started. I mean, we probably were a little more sustainable prior to Woodrow Wilson, and we talked about this last time, but definitely prior to Lincoln, when we were truly just a voluntary union of free and independent states or whatever. And I've lost my train of thought, so sorry. I changed the subject, so you get to go.
I just
host. Way to go.
I was just thinking about 2 points related to that I think are of interest to consider here. The first is the breakup of countries in Europe. It happened all the time in the 20th century. At the end of World War I, you had the Russian Empire, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire just completely fracturing. And particularly with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you had Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, just Poland, all these countries were restored or created that had either not existed for like 100+ years or had never existed at all in any sort of independent form. So the map of Europe changed radically just over the course of those 4 years. And then again, coming out of World War II, you had a split Germany, the borders of Poland and so many other countries just were like Poland itself was just shifted. Like they lost half of its territory on the eastern half of the country, and they just took some territory from Germany to in the west just to make up for it. It wasn't even their decision; it was the Soviets. They just wanted more land, so they just shifted Poland over. Like, why not? So, yeah, that kind of thing happens all the time. And then breakup of Yugoslavia during most of our own lifetimes in the 1990s. It happened again. That's how you got Croatia, Bosnia, and all those other countries. So, borders are changing all the time, and it hasn't happened so much recently in North America, but that doesn't mean it never will. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is touching on an earlier point you made, even with the expansion of the Louisiana Purchase in the early days of the United States. So even the territory that the dispute with King George originated over to begin with. So for those who don't know, the Proclamation of 1763 was one of the first big policy positions that the colonies disagreed with the British government on, because they basically said no settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains. Even though the British just took all this territory from the French, they're just saying you can't settle over there anymore. So that was in theory to keep peace with the Native Americans, but the colonists just thought all this territory was grifted from them. So it wasn't a guarantee during the war or after that they were going to end up with any of that territory west of the Appalachian Mountains. The only reason they did was because the states sent over a few very skilled diplomats to negotiate the peace. And I believe the one that's credited with getting those Western territories in the final peace settlement is John Jay. And the other parties to the peace, like including France, were completely shocked that they were able to get so much territory from the British. Nobody expected that, because everything east of the Mississippi and north of the Ohio River and west of roughly today's Pennsylvania was annexed to Quebec basically about 10 years before the war started. So that was a whole nother issue that the colonists weren't happy about either. But yeah, so Quebec lost it and it went to the new United States. So how exactly they got away with that, I don't know. But even us having the territory between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains wasn't a guarantee.
Yeah, my guess. I mean, I talk about the if onlys a whole lot, but maybe what shook out is the best that could have been hoped for. I mean, I don't want to be like, I don't want to sound like a moderate or whatever, because I'm not. But like it definitely would have been better had the brave explorers who settled the West just gone out and formed their own things rather than look to Washington D.C. for their patronage, basically. But the alternative might be that a whole bunch of European countries owned these lands, and then we'd probably still be looking at a very violent and uncertain territory. So, like, I guess it makes sense. Like, it might have just been us or them. Who knows? Maybe there would have been some sort of resurgence of the Roman Empire or something like that. My partner and I are watching Man in the High Castle right now, which is sort of a revisionist, like what happens if Hitler had won World War II. And
yeah, I've seen it.
In that show, they've got it divided by the Rockies. Basically, the Rocky Mountain region is a neutral zone between the East, which is all ruled by the Reich, Germany, and then the Pacific states are ruled by Japan. And we're only on season 1 right now, so I don't know how it ends. But it's an interesting way. Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting way of like looking at the map, because I mean, the states are still all there. They just have Nazi swastikas and rising suns on them instead of U.S. flags. I don't know.
Right. So the premise that you're describing, it doesn't that's like a lot of interesting stuff happens during the rest of the seasons, but the core concept is basically there the whole time. So the fact that they need to have that buffer region to begin with, maybe it's just too big for them. I'm not even 100% sure why they had it. Maybe it's just too big for them to administer. I don't know. But yeah, just the concept of having the, the Germans, not only were they occupying like all of Western Russia, presumably, but they're occupying all of the Eastern U.S. somehow. Like how many Germans could there have been? Like,
and presumably it's all of Western Europe. I mean,
right.
They would have to have gone through France and probably England or, Britain, at least. And weren't they allied with Italy? Yeah.
They were, but by the end of the war, they basically had Italy under their thumb, and it was kind of like a puppet regime towards the end.
Right. So Italy would have been part of the Nazi regime as well in this story.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Italy doesn't have a chunk of the United States, so it makes sense that they were completely subservient to Germany.
Yeah, I think the war happened similarly up until maybe like just before D-Day, and then somehow the Germans developed nukes first, and then they nuked DC, and then after that they surrendered shortly thereafter.
And this is all of this stuff that you're talking about is like in the opening credits of the show, so it's not really spoilers if anybody plans on watching it. Although it came out, I mean, this is a pre-Trump show, so if you haven't watched it yet, it's probably beyond the statute of limitations for spoilers anyway.
Right. So none of that stuff is new information to show watchers if you've watched the opening scene. But anyway, I think that's the premise behind it. So yeah, this is, I mean, it kind of plays into why I'm not someone who thinks we need to be worried about a foreign threat, at least as far as an actual land invasion. I don't think that's possible, because Americans, at least some of them, are the most heavily armed people anywhere. And, if anyone knows how to fight a guerrilla war in this hemisphere, or at least the western side of the world, it's going to be the Americans. So
yeah,
I just don't see any issue there.
I think the bad guys, and by bad guys I mean the progressives, are rather than a shooting war, they're really more looking for a political war. And I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy mentioned replacement theory or whatever on the debate stage, and I guess that's a toxic thing you can't talk about. But the Democrats talk, or progressives talk about it all the time. The browning of America, or whatever they call it. They talk about it like it's a good thing. I mean, and if it wasn't so tied into politics and forcing other people to act according to your will, then it would be a good thing. Like I said earlier, I love my melting pot. And I guess that gets into like monoculture, which is something that Pete Quinones, the former managing editor of the Libertarian Institute, who has now taken a rightward bent, I guess. Even Prax Ben, who is the hardcore Hoppian guy, was calling him a Nazi recently, which I haven't gone so far as to call him a Nazi, because I just don't like calling people that unless they actually are a member of the Nazi party. But he's kind of gone that far, I guess. And so his big thing now is a monoculture. He wants to have a monoculture in the United States. And I don't think that's possible at all.
No.
I mean, you can have monocultures in a neighborhood. Or even a city. I mean, if you go to Portland, Oregon, or even Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I live, it's, you can tell it's culturally left. It's egalitarian. There's a lot of businesses that claim to be worker owned. And that's something that the culture values here. They value ethnic diversity. We're, it's a very diverse city. Although I will say that Minneapolis is still ghettoized as hell. Like I live in a mostly black neighborhood, and like my friend Nate from the LPMN lives in a mostly white neighborhood. We both live in the same city. We have the same mayor, different city council members, and just shout out to Mr. Eisenhower. We're divided by a freeway, so it takes longer for me to get to Nate's house than it does for me to get to some of the farther reaches of the suburbs, because there's a huge interstate highway that we have to navigate around, and especially during rush hour, you can't just kind of get across the city very easily. And it's that's the case in a lot of big cities. This is completely off the subject, but like people talk about systemic racism and things like that. And if you want to see systemic racism in action, you just have to look at the way that the interstate highways were built in the middle of cities and the neighborhoods that were impacted and how they were impacted. Every ghetto in America, I would say, is probably on the other side of an interstate highway.
Yeah, Philadelphia
Calvin
is not even immune to that, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So you have to redirect me. I'm getting at this point, my brain's getting a little bit tired.
All right. So let's come to some concluding points. So like one more serious note each, and then one more fun note each to end it off. So on the more serious side, so I think we've talked a little bit about the process, or how things might be divided up if there were to be splits, but short of actual states declaring secession, what do you think is the best path to a more harmonious governing system, something involving decentralization, like maybe going down to your counties or your towns? Sure. or anything like that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that running for local office and things like that, especially, and this is something that's really hard in Minnesota, because in order to run for county sheriff, you have to have a law enforcement license. So we have trouble obviously finding cops who are libertarian. But in any case, running for sheriff and district attorney, to another like impossible to find candidates for a position, because there's not a whole lot of attorneys in the party. Those are very important to me, offices for libertarians to run for. I don't know, like there's the idea of like running for just everything, town constable and city council and school board and things like that. To me, like if the position doesn't have any sort of legislative or executive function, then I don't necessarily see it as like a valuable use of energy. Pennsylvania's mileage definitely varies, I think. Here in Minnesota, that's it's fine. But so yeah, running for those local offices is great. Local activism is great, but really, I mean, nothing's going to change until the legislation changes, until the interpretations of the Constitution that don't make any sense, that centralize authority. Until that changes, I don't foresee a huge path towards liberty, other than people creating their own liberty, where they're creating parallel societies and opening their own businesses where they maybe do some business under the table and that kind of thing. So agorism basically is what I'm saying. I think that's probably the surest path forward until this collapse comes, which, like I said, may not be during our lifetimes. But also just kind of be vigilant, be ready, and yeah, that's that.
Yeah, so that was all good points. I'll just reinforce one of the things you said, and maybe expand upon it a little bit. As far as the local election goes, that is key. We've made a lot of strides towards that in Pennsylvania. Like we ran a lot of seats for town council in particular, things like that. And then in 2 years, we will be able to run constables. And are you familiar with what those positions do?
No, wasn't okay. Jacob a constable? Okay.
So they're basically, you don't need to have any special certification in order to do it. Well, you don't need to have any special certification in order to run. There is some sort of I don't know what it is, like maybe 40 to 80 hour long training course. I don't remember exactly what it is. Might be less than that. But you can do it after you've been elected. So you don't need to have it going in, which is a huge advantage. So they're basically law enforcement officers that don't have to report to anyone, as far as I know, except for the constituents. So you can operate on your own, essentially, within the law. You can deputize people, and you can become like a legal force within yourself, in a sense. So we're looking into ways that it can be capitalized on now. But if you want to be in a situation where you nullify federal drug laws as an actual law enforcement officer in that locality, then you could do that. So there's a lot of different ways we can take advantage of that. We already have, I think, a couple dozen elected, but we haven't been able to establish contact with all of them, but we want to get more in office in the future. And even just this past November, on a write-in ballot, somehow in my own county, we were able to get in a town councilman. So that's awesome. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do with having someone in office, not in my town, unfortunately, a couple towns over, but I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do with that. It definitely seems promising, and I'm hoping that we can just keep those efforts going in Pennsylvania and elsewhere to try to advance some of these policies that can just make our areas better and give us the freedom and flexibility we need to prepare for whatever might be coming.
Yeah, we found a little bit of success with just actually lobbying the legislators. We didn't get exactly what we wanted, but we got them to have conversations about what we wanted and kind of temper some of the things that would have hurt us. So that's good. This was a major party bill that I'm not even going to get into because it's so boring to talk about major party stuff. But so yeah, I think there's a couple of prongs to that approach. The elected, especially in PA, where like every office is elected. that's a huge thing. Y'all have so many already electeds in PA that's probably a great path forward. It probably depends on the structure of the government wherever you are.
Right. So then, a more fun note, since this is the last episode that I'll be doing for the year, what are some holiday traditions of yours, or any fun holiday plans you have coming up? Just share one with us.
Okay, so tomorrow's my birthday, and so my partner and I are, and I take the week of my birthday off because it's the week before Christmas. So like I just kind of get a good little vacation. So I'm staying home this week and doing work around the house. And today I went to lunch with our treasurer, which we had never hung out before, like just one-on-one. So that was nice. So I'm just taking it easy. My very favorite holiday tradition. So this is it takes a story. It's really weird. One year, my little brother, who was really little at the time, something happened. Maybe he bumped his head or whatever. I was probably too young even to remember what happened, but he screamed. And he screamed so like loud and shrill that like everybody kind of turned and looked. And my uncle, just like as a passing comment, said, "Oh man, he screamed like the kid from The Omen." And I had never heard of The Omen. I didn't know what The Omen was. But like my uncle was like, "Oh man, you have to see it." And so keep in mind that this is my uncle who had no kids and didn't realize that, recommending this horror movie to a small child probably wasn't the best, mentorship or role modelship. But he did that. And my parents, being the greatest parents in the world, were like, "Yeah, we can rent The Omen. What the heck?" So we had this weird family tradition after that of renting horror movies on Christmas. And so it's my favorite tradition is watching a horror movie on Christmas. And I think this year, actually, given that the Civil War movie is what we're talking about, it's gotten A24, which is the studio that's putting it out. And I should say I have never seen an A24 movie I didn't like. Between A24 and Wes Anderson, those are like propping up the movie industry right now. I can't stand anything else coming out of Hollywood. But I'll probably watch an A24 scary movie on Christmas. Maybe go over to Andrew's grandmother is having heart surgery, so she usually hosts us on Christmas Eve and we play board games and stuff. But she's going to be recovering, so we'll probably go over to his parents' house to play games and do the Christmas stuff.
Well, my best to your grandmother, and happy early birthday.
Hey, thanks.
Awesome.
It's only a few hours away.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to get me a present, lpmn.org/donate. Give them some money in my name, or in your name, however you want to do it. But yeah, slide the lpmn.org a few bucks. We could use it. Thanks.
I was gonna say, can you like leave a memo with your donation and just say like "Happy Birthday, James" or something? Yeah, you can do that. Okay, yeah. Nice. Everyone, go do that.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay. So, traditions. My family traditions have been evolving a lot because now that my sister is married to a foreign national who now has his green card, so he can hang out in the U.S. too. But he's a French citizen, so she's been spending a lot of time over in visiting France, so I don't see her quite as much anymore. So mainly it's been like my wife and I, and my parents are separated, so my wife and I have been kind of bouncing around just like within the month of December between a bunch of different families. Like there's my mom's family, like an extended version of my mom's family that we sometimes spend time with, my dad's family and that extended family, and then my mom has had a partner for a long time, and sometimes we spend time with his family, and then there's the in-laws, can't forget them, so there's the in-laws family too. So there's just a lot of different families, and there haven't been a whole lot of regularities recently, other than trying to at least spend some time with at least as many of those families as we can. So, I mean, it can be a bit chaotic at times. And my wife, who's only really spent time with her family up until meeting me, it's a lot for her sometimes, but it's fine. I like spending time with family. So it's fine by me.
Cool. And the as if on cue, the LPMN chair Rebecca Whiting just wished me a happy birthday in the chat. I didn't even know she was here. So there we go.
Nice. Okay. Well, on that note, I'll just make one quick announcement for the audience. So we are going to be probably taking a little bit of a hiatus for the next month or two, at least on the podcast. It could be a little bit longer because a couple reasons. First, I have many projects that I'm going to be working on over the next few months that do not involve the podcast, but they're things like working on the rally in DC in a couple of months. So we're going to be hard at work on that. I got a couple Liberty 101 projects coming down the pipeline as well that I'm going to announce soon on social media. So you'll see that. And just a couple other things I'm working on too, like free and equal elections. I mentioned a couple episodes ago, I was working with Christina Tobin on that project as well. So a lot's happening between now and May. So that's going to keep me busy. Also, we're transitioning podcast hosts. So we may not be using StreamYard anymore. I'm not sure because I have to work out the details of the plan with Jacob and the rest of the members of the caucus. So that might be in flux, and we're also trying to bring in people to help with the episodes as well, both like in terms of co-hosting and people to find guests and all that. So we're in the middle of trying to find people to help out with that. So if you're in the caucus and you're interested in helping, just reach out to me. I think that's about it. So any final signing off words or things you want to share that you haven't yet, James?
No, that's it. Thank you, Calvin. I guess if you don't follow me on Twitter, I'm at JamesLJ. If you want to toss me a follow, I think that's required of me to say. So there it is. But other than that, thank you. Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, etc. We probably won't talk before then. So thanks a lot.
Okay. All right. Thanks, James. And make sure everyone to follow at LP Mises Caucus PA for all the podcast related, Mises Caucus related updates, and at LPPA.org for everything Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania, and at Liberty 101 class for everything related to Liberty 101. So until next time, don't forget to take human action.